Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're digging into a really provocative question, one that comes from a classic sociological text, and it's this. How did a group once seen as being on the lowest rung of society end up defining what success and influence look like for an entire community?
Right. This is the big question for today's Explainer. It really gets to the heart of things like influence, status, and, well, how we even define what it means to be successful in the first place.
Now, according to sociologist E. Frazier, the answer requires us to take a step back in time. We've got to understand the historical groundwork that he laid out in his groundbreaking 1957 book.
Okay, so Frazier's analysis kicks off by identifying two foundational and really starkly different cultural traditions that popped up in Black America way before the 20th century. So on one side, you had what he called the Gentile tradition, which was adopted by a small, often free, elite group. And on the other side, you had the folk tradition, which was born from the collective experience of the enslaved masses. These two cultural streams, they ran parallel, but honestly, they were worlds apart.
Let's talk about the Gentile tradition. This was a culture built on the ideals of the Southern lady and gentleman. You had this small elite, and they really valued classical literature, music, and a super strict code of conduct. This was all about actively setting themselves apart from the larger Black population.
And then, in total contrast, you have the folk tradition. This was a culture of survival, of resilience. The church was its absolute heart. It provided community, hope, a moral compass. The spirituals, for instance, were a direct expression of this experience. It was a way to find meaning in a really tragic fate.
But these two traditions, which had been so separate, they were about to collide. And it was all thanks to one of the biggest demographic shifts in American history, which created this whole new urban landscape.
So for decades, these groups really kept their distance. But then, the Great Migration changed the entire board. As millions of people moved from the rural South to cities up north, those old social structures and cultural boundaries just started to completely break down.
And this was a pivotal moment. I mean, in the anonymity of this city, your family lineage and those Gentile manners, they mattered less and less. Frazier argues that the new universal way to measure your status became one simple thing: money. So this new urban environment, with its totally new set of rules, it gave rise to a completely different kind of middle class, what Frazier called the new bourgeoisie.
You know, a visiting French sociologist had this really sharp observation that kind of captured the essence of this new class. He called them colored Babbitts. So what in the world does that mean?
Well, the term Babbitt points to a mindset that's all about conspicuous consumption. It wasn't about saving or building generational wealth in that old-fashioned sense. It was all about showing your success through spending.
So here's the crucial point. This new class didn't just rise up economically. No, they established a whole new dominant set of cultural values that completely flipped the old order on its head.
In this shift, it was absolutely profound. For the old guard, respectability was tied to a stable family and, conventional morals. But for this new class, public scandals and divorces, they didn't diminish your status. They could actually enhance it, adding to your notoriety and your prestige.
Frazier's analysis suggests this wasn't really an invention of new values, but more of an elevation of values that were already rooted in that folk tradition. He argues that ideas like conventional marriage just hadn't developed in the same way within the slave environment.
And this brings us right back to our original question. Who were the standard bearers of this new culture? Well, Frazier points to two key groups: entertainers and wealthy figures from the criminal underworld.
Frazier argues that their influence was uniquely powerful. Their glamour and, this is crucial, their financial success, which was often supported by the white world, made them the ultimate role models for the wider Black community.
So what happened next was this fascinating cultural cascade. Frazier claims the high-spending lifestyles of underworld figures, they set the bar. That standard of consumption, the expensive car, the lavish home, that became the definition of success. And that standard was then copied by the professional classes, the doctors and lawyers, who also wanted to prove that they had made it.
Okay, so what was the ultimate consequence of this massive cultural shift? Let's get into the final analysis here.
This quote really just captures the final outcome perfectly: a complete inversion of the social hierarchy. It was a world where money, no matter where it came from, commanded more respect than old family lineage or traditional morals.
The final analysis in Frazier's work is really a psychological one.
It suggests that this focus on things, on lavish spending and status symbols, it was all a way to compensate for this deep-seated feeling of inferiority, being caught between a white world that rejected them and a folk heritage they had left behind.
And, we have to keep this in perspective. This entire analysis was written over 70 years ago. The world has changed dramatically since 1957, right? And that's exactly what brings us to our final, and I think, really important question.
Frazier's book gives us a historical explanation for how a particular set of values became so dominant. The question it really leaves for us is, what's the legacy of that cultural shift today? That's something to think about.